Well, hello, everyone. I was driving in my truck the other day. I have an old pickup truck with not a very good sound system, so I don't like to listen to music. So sometimes I listen to AM talk radio. And usually, of late, I've been tuning in to the Glenn Beck show. And he said something the other day, he's talking about all the stuff going on and the globalist takeover. And, he said that Christians have to wake up. We have to wake up and unite and fight against and to try to save civilization. Yeah. And, it just struck me as like, is that what Christians are called to do, to save civilization? Really? Well, didn't Jesus say, my kingdom is no part of this world? And his followers must be no part of this world? So why would a Christian want to save a civilization that is ruled over and has been ruled over by Satan the devil for many, many centuries? It's God's will to destroy civilization, specifically Christian civilization. There was a time before Christianity and God had a religion. He revealed himself to a man named Abraham and to his son Isaac and to his son Jacob. And you no doubt know the story. Jacob had 12 sons, and Jehovah changed his name to Israel. And he organized Israel and gave them his law and gave them a form of worship. And eventually the Israelites came into the promised land, and David conquered the Jebusite stronghold called Jerusalem. And he made that his capital, but also he intended to build a temple on Jerusalem for Jehovah. Well, God didn't allow David to do that. He was a warrior and a man of much bloodshed, fighting the wars of Jehovah, I might add. But his son Solomon, of course, built this magnificent temple. And Jehovah himself said that that is where he caused his name to reside, on that particular city. That was the only place on earth where God approved of this worship of him. God even represented his presence in the most holy by the Shekinah light that always hovered over the Ark of the Covenant. And only the high priest could go in there once a year. But what happened to that beautiful temple where Jehovah had placed his name, in that city of Jerusalem? Jehovah caused it to be destroyed. And why? Because the people who were supposed to represent Jehovah and the true worshipers, as they're called today by a certain religious entity, they proved to be false. And God warned them and warned them and warned them and warned them, and then he was done with them. And they paid a heavy price. But of course, Jehovah brought them back, and they restored pure worship, so-called. And that was Jehovah's purpose, because Israel had to be in existence. The Davidic line had to remain intact until the coming of the Messiah. And Jesus checked all the boxes. He was a son of David, of the tribe of Judah, of course. And he was anointed. And so inherited those promises that Jehovah had made, that one of David's offspring would sit upon the throne forever. So at that point, Jesus was anointed to become king. And then from that point on, Christianity became Jehovah's religion. God sort of phased out Judaism. He didn't destroy it right off. A lot of the Jews accepted Jesus. And but then eventually, in the year 70, Jehovah destroyed Jerusalem once again. And so Christianity has existed in all of its various forms, so-called Christianity, I might add. And Europe, and of course, Americans came from Europe originally, and they brought their religion with them, their form of Christianity. They brought the King James Bible with them. Well, that was a good thing. Because for centuries, the Catholic Church would not allow people to have a Bible in their language. It was the gravest crime you could commit, is to try to translate the Bible into the common language of Europeans. They'd hunt you down like a dog and murder you. But now, of course, the Catholics have a Bible. The Church of England frowned upon the Bible too. They persecuted its original translators. Anyway, but this idea of saving Christian civilization, Jehovah has a pattern. I mean, he shows us what he's going to do in the future. So as I explained, he used Israel, he used Judaism, provided the Messiah. Then, as Paul explained to the Hebrews in his letter to them, it fulfilled its purpose and had become obsolete and was near to passing away. When Paul had written that letter, and a few years later, it did pass away. So now, what happens when Christianity fulfills God's purpose? Well, what is God's purpose? Most people don't know. They think we live and we die, and then our soul floats off somewhere, and if you're a Christian, then you go to heaven, and that's supposed to go on and on and on. No, God has a very concise, simple, and, well, I don't know about simple, but he has a definite purpose. It's to undo, basically, what Satan has done. All the harm that Satan has done, which includes death. Jehovah is going to undo death. The price has already been paid, the ransom. And when Christ becomes king, even the dead will come back to life. Not in heaven, of course, except for a few, 144,000. People go crazy, light their hair on fire. Oh, Jehovah's Witnesses don't believe only 144,000. Well, why would you want to go to heaven? What's the point? Well, people have been given a false alternative. You go to hell or heaven. You take your pick, right? But that's, of course, not true. Jehovah's purpose is to have people live on earth forever. That was his original purpose with Adam and Eve, until Satan intervened. And so Christ's kingdom is going to bring about God's original purpose. You know, it's interesting. I have so many Trinitarian discussions over the years, and they have their pet proof text and all of that. But in the 15th chapter of 1 Corinthians, Paul was talking about the resurrection and the first resurrection. And then he spoke about the kingdom and next the end of Christ's kingdom, when he has brought to nothing all of Satan's work, including death. Mankind will no longer die. when Christ has finished his work. They will have been restored to the perfection that Adam and Eve had. But what happens next? Then Christ hands the kingdom over to his God and Father and subjects himself to God, so that God may be worshipped by all. So if Jesus was God, why would he hand the kingdom back to himself and subject himself to the one who subjected all things to him? Obviously, the Trinity is a fraud. It's a shell game they play. But it's absurd, and the scriptures cannot be used honestly to support them. Well, where am I going with this? Well, we're talking about the end of Christianity, when it has accomplished God's purpose, when all of those who have been called into his kingdom are gathered, and a great crowd from all the nations are prepared to go through a great tribulation and survive on earth. People are going to survive the end of the world. People ridicule the Watchtower's second president, J.F. Rutherford. He had a slogan, "Millions now living will never die." And, of course, you can ridicule him for getting it wrong because the people, millions of people living then, have died. But that slogan was intended to, shock people into examining their beliefs that you go to heaven or hell, that's it. So it's interesting, though, that millions now living will never die. And I can say that with confidence, without any fear of having to eat my words, because we're at the end of this present civilization. And people that don't have any connection with the Bible or prophecy or try to explain it recognize that, well, as Glenn Beck said, Christian civilization is being attacked. For example, what is going on with flooding America and Europe with millions of immigrants who do not share the culture or the religion? Look what's happened to England. The King of England is also the head of the Church of England. And he has allowed millions of Muslims to flood into England. There are hundreds of mosques now. And I saw an clip of, I don't know how many Muslims were, they bow on their little carpets and pray to Allah facing Mecca. And with all of these hundreds of mosques throughout England, they were all, it's kind of funny, they were on the lawn of Westminster Abbey praying to Allah. So, and this has to be approved by the King of England, the head of the Church of England. I've written about it and spoken about it before, but I've always believed and preached and taught that the King of the North is the British Empire. And before you say, oh, the British Empire doesn't even exist anymore. Well, it's not a state empire like Babylon or Rome. It's a world empire of finance. It controls the value of money. And it's run out of the city of London. I saw a little tweet of Liz Truss, who has the distinction of being the shortest serving prime minister in the history of the UK. It was a few weeks, a couple of months, I can't remember, but the poor gal, she got into office, she said, I thought I would have some some kind of power to, cause policies to be affected and make change. And she realized, and she said that she didn't have any power. The Bank of England was the ruling power. So, but what's going on now? Like, okay, the king of the north. It says he will not honor the gods of his forefathers. Well, who are the gods that the king of the north has worshipped? Well, since Constantine, it has been the Christian God. They've, superficially at least, paid homage to the God of the Bible and Jesus. They call themselves Christians. Glenn Beck said, we have to save Christian civilization. And the Church of England was a big part of that. All the original colonists, most of them, came from England and were subjects of the Church of England. But now it is being destroyed by the head of the Church of England. And it fulfills prophecy that the king of the north, right before the time of the end, we're not in the time of the end yet, didn't begin in 1914. It's about to, any day. But this king of the north will have success all the way to the end. And he will succeed in destroying Christian civilization. And it will be ultimately the work of Jehovah. And that's what happened back when Jehovah destroyed Jerusalem. I'm going to read to you from the 25th chapter of Jeremiah. Jeremiah had been preaching for quite a while. And it says, from the 13th year of Josiah, the son of Amon, the king of Judah, down to this day, these 23 years, the word of Jehovah has occurred to me, and I kept speaking to you people, rising up early and speaking, but you did not listen. I've always been an early riser, by the way. I just noticed this. I've been online for 23 years. Jeremiah says, all these 23 years, I've been speaking to you people. So I came online in 2002, September. So I'm just saying, it's kind of interesting. Anyway, Jeremiah says, you haven't listened, and Jehovah says that he is making Jeremiah pass a cup to all the nations and making them drink. And the cup represented Jehovah's judgment that they were drinking to themselves. Now, obviously, Jeremiah didn't leave Jerusalem and travel to Egypt and travel to Ammon and travel to Tyre and Moab and Ethiopia and Libya. He simply published Jehovah's judgments. And all of those nations were conquered by Nebuchadnezzar. And it was considered as coming from Jehovah. Now I'm going to take you on down here. At verse 27, he says, you must say to them, this is what Jehovah of armies, the God of Israel, has said, drink and get drunk and puke and fall so that you cannot get up because of the sword that I am sending among you. And it must occur that in case you refuse to take the cup out of if they refuse to take the cup out of your hand, you must say to them, this is what Jehovah of armies has said, you will drink without fail. For look, it is upon the city upon which my name is called that I am starting off in bringing calamity. And should you yourselves in any way go free of punishment? It says, you will not go free of punishment. For there is a sword I'm calling against all the inhabitants of the earth. Well, here's a question. Is there a city where Jehovah's name has been called? Well, no, not a literal city. Is there an organization that is associated with the name of Jehovah? And the answer is absolutely yes. And I don't think I need to tell you what that organization is. So some may say, well, that was Jehovah's judgment back then. Well, let me read on. Verse 31, a noise will certainly come clear to the farthest part of the earth. For there is a controversy that Jehovah has with the nations. He must personally put himself in judgment with all flesh. Not just the little region of the Middle East and Northern Africa, as in the 6th century. He says, as regards the wicked, he must give them to the sword. He said, this is what Jehovah of armies has said. Look, a calamity is going forth from nation to nation. A great tempest itself will be roused up from the remotest part of the earth. They will not be bewailed, neither will they be gathered or be buried. And then verse 34 says, howl, you shepherds, and cry out and wallow about, you majestic ones of the flock, because your days for slaughtering and for your scatterings have been fulfilled. And you must fall like a desirable vessel. And a place to flee to you has perished from the shepherds, and a means of escape from the majestic ones of the flock. Listen, the outcry of shepherds and the howling of the majestic ones of the flock, for Jehovah is despoiling their pasture. So if Jehovah has a controversy with all the nations and puts himself in judgment with all flesh, we're not talking about what happened in the days of Jeremiah. We're talking about the coming of Christ. And Jehovah said he would put himself in judgment with those people back then with the sword. In fact, if you go to chapter 24, he uses the expression sword, famine, and pestilence. It's used, 10 times in the book of Jeremiah itself and in other books of the prophets. Sword, famine, and pestilence. Sword, famine, and pestilence. You see any connection with what Jesus said when his apostles asked him, what will be the sign of your presence and the conclusion of the system? Nation will rise against nation, sword. There'll be food shortages, famine, and pestilence. And Jesus said, that's just the beginning. Pangs of distress. Jehovah's Witnesses, of course, should be familiar with this passage in Jeremiah, because the Watchtower has always taught that is Armageddon. Jehovah putting himself in judgment with all flesh. Well, there's a problem with that, because in the case of Jeremiah, he used Nebuchadnezzar as his executioner. At Armageddon, Jesus Christ will be the executioner. And here's another thing that doesn't add up. Jehovah tells the shepherds to wail. They have been despoiled. Their sheep have been scattered. Isn't that what I just read? This time of your scattering. Well, who are the shepherds? They're the Christian elders. The majestic ones are those who exalt themselves as governing body and modern day apostles and faithful and discreet slave. One of the governing body recently, it was an annual meeting, I think it was 2 years ago, or maybe last year, whatever. He said that the governing body will not have any reason to apologize or feel embarrassed for getting it wrong. So they're basically saying if Jehovah doesn't tell us, then that's on him. We're doing the best we can do. And, if we don't get it right, we're not going to be embarrassed. If people are stumbled, that's not on us. Jehovah is running this thing. And so he didn't tell us. And so, do you know they're right about that, though? It is Jehovah's doing, because if you read in Isaiah, Jehovah has blinded the minds, covered the heads of his prophets and visionaries that they may not see through it until Jehovah accomplishes his strange work. And what is his strange work? To use an organization of Christians to preach and teach and then have their expectations completely dashed, crashed. Jehovah's Witnesses are doing their pure worship convention this year, and we're the epitome of pure worship. We're God's people, and Jehovah's going to, guide us all the way through. And that ain't going to happen. Because, what's the foundation teaching of the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society? I mean, we all know the simple truth. Jehovah is God, Jesus is his son, you don't have a soul and all that. That's not wrong. But the teaching that Christ came in 1914 and that World War I was the fulfillment of the sword, famine, and pestilence. The Spanish flu, it killed more people than World War I. So by Jehovah's covering the heads of his prophets and visionaries, Jehovah doesn't actively do that. But Paul explained to the Thessalonians, 1 Thessalonians, the 2nd chapter, he was talking about this man of lawlessness. And he is the point man for an operation of Satan that goes to those who know the truth to test their love of the truth. So this is, the society is built upon 1914. Christ came and cleansed the organization, and it's on to greater glory, right? And so my message these past 23 years has been 1914 is part of the operation of Satan, with every lying sign and powerful works and every unrighteous deception to convince Christians who are otherwise doing God's work that Christ has already come. And of course they say he's coming again, but let's be honest, that's the third coming. Jehovah's Witnesses don't even talk about the second coming of Christ, even though if you search diligently, you'll see that the Watchtower said, people don't believe the second coming of Christ because they don't read the sign aright. They're saying Jesus' second coming was 1914, but he's coming again. So that's the third coming. Of course, they'd never say that because people would laugh them out of business. But so what happens? I mean, we're on the edge of World War III, aren't we? Everybody, well, not everybody, but people that are awake and watching. I did a little short video yesterday. I was out taking a walk, and I spoke about the attack upon the Russian nuclear triad, they call it. They have all their nuclear bombers out on the airfield because that's part of the START treaty. You can't have your planes tucked away and then make a sneak attack. So both sides have their bombers out so they can be observed by satellite intelligence and all that. And Ukraine attacked these bombers. It doesn't matter how much success they had. You hear different numbers. 40 planes were destroyed, 4 were destroyed. That doesn't matter. It violated a treaty. And these planes were far away from the battle lines in Ukraine. And those planes weren't being used in the war in Ukraine. Well, anyway, somebody left a message on that little short and said, because I said the Anglo-American military alliance attacked these planes. And somebody left a comment and said, Ukraine attacked those planes. You better get your facts straight, buddy. And it's interesting. Immediately when that attack occurred, Zelensky said, I did this. Of course, he's a puppet for the... There's no way. I mean, the people that analyze these things, Scott Ritter, McGregor, and the guys that are the upstanding truth tellers that have been a part of this system, the military complex. They know how it works. And they happen to be a few with a little integrity and are willing to speak the truth. And they say there's no way, absolutely no way that Ukraine could have pulled this off without Anglo-American intelligence, satellite navigation, and all. It was a very sophisticated operation. And, does anybody really believe that the Ukrainians blew up the Nord Stream pipeline? That was a sophisticated operation. So the Anglo-American war machine, particularly the British Empire, is at war with Russia. And they have been for a long, long time. 200 years they've been angling to prevent Russia and the United States from any sort of alliance. And their ultimate goal is to break up Russia into smaller pieces and exploit its vast natural resources. Putin was almost assassinated. Did you realize that a couple of weeks ago? 45 drones were sent into the Kursk. They knew his helicopter was in the region, and a swarm of drones was sent in to take him out. So we're essentially in war. The world is at war right now. It hasn't gone hot, but the intent is. In Britain, they're saying we're on a war footing. We have to prepare for war with Russia. Germany's saying the same thing. France is saying the same thing. We're going to have to prepare to go to war against Russia. Why? Why go to war against? Well, Putin wants to take over all of Europe. That's CIA, MI6 propaganda. Putin has no intention of taking over Ukraine. If you read what the Russians say, and they pretty much do what they say, their special military operation was aimed to denazify and to demilitarize Ukraine because the Ukrainians were killing Russians in the breakaway republics, and they forced Putin to intervene to prevent the genocide that was occurring. So my point is that this great tempest that will be roused up from the remotest parts of the earth is not Armageddon. Because Armageddon is when Jehovah intervenes to protect his people and destroy those attacking his people. And this occurs after God punishes his people, after they are scattered, and after the wicked within Jehovah's organization are put out and put to death. If you read there in the 24th chapter of Jeremiah, the chapter right before what I had been reading, Jehovah gave an illustration of figs. And there were two baskets of figs. There were good figs and there were bad figs that were so bad they could not be eaten. And those bad figs represented the Jews who were stubborn and stiff-necked, who refused to, submit to Nebuchadnezzar. They could have survived. They could have come out with their hands up and gone off into exile. But if they stayed in the city, then they would die by the sword, famine, and pestilence. So those good and bad figs represent what Jesus illustrated in a number of illustrations. They're good fish and bad fish. During the conclusion, right, they're hauled up onto the beach, and the good fish are taken and the bad fish thrown into the fire. The wheat and the weeds. They're both in God's kingdom. Jesus said he will send out his angels and collect out from his kingdom persons doing lawlessness. So Christ's kingdom, in that sense, is his congregation. So what is coming, this great tempest of Jehovah, is world war. And, of course, famine and pestilence. And that will serve as God's judgment, beginning first in the city where God has placed his name, upon the modern organization of Jehovah's Witnesses. And I've been preaching about this for 23 years. And, we're right on the edge of World War III, and yet they're talking about peace and security, and sudden destruction comes. It's not Armageddon. World War III. Well, thanks for watching. Hopefully we'll do another Sunday talk next week.